The crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel ballroom cast fractured light across 400 faces that Robert Brennan no longer recognized, each reflection breaking into smaller fragments, like memories of a life that had belonged to someone else. 23 years changes everything. The architecture of power, the currency of reputation, the very language of ambition that separates men into categories of relevant and forgotten. Rob stood at the mahogany bar, nursing overpriced scotch. He couldn't afford $18 for 2 fingers of liquor that burned less than the humiliation of being here at all, watching men half his age negotiate deals that would have seemed reckless in his era, but now passed for visionary in this new century where disruption was virtue and caution was cowardice. The tuxedo hung loose on his 6-foot frame that had shed 20 pounds since Margaret's death rental fabric that whispered its temporary claim to elegance. With every movement, the bow tie slightly crooks because Rob had forgotten how to tie one properly after years of wearing scrubs in the utilitarian clothing of emergency medicine. Security hadn't questioned his entrance when he'd presented himself at the registration desk. The old membership credentials, laminated relics from 1999 when he'd attended this same gala as rising star in medical research, still carried ghost authority in their database, a clerical oversight that felt almost like providence, like the universe offering him one final chance to stand in rooms where his name once meant something beyond cautionary tale. Across the ballroom, past the ice sculptures that depicted something vaguely medical, a double helix perhaps, or stylized representation of molecules he couldn't identify from this distance, Victor Ashford accepted his award with practiced humility, the kind that comes from media coaching rather than genuine modesty, from years of learning exactly which facial expressions conveyed gravitas and which suggested weakness. Lifetime achievement in financial innovation. The words scrolled across massive screens, flanking the stage white text on black background, corporate presentation aesthetic. The irony burned hotter than the scotch that was already warming Rob's empty stomach in ways that would make tomorrow morning unpleasant. Rob studied the man who'd once sat across from him in a cramped office on Fifth Avenue during their residency years, eager and brilliant and hungrier than anyone Rob had ever mentored. That hunger manifesting as 16-hour days and questions that pushed beyond curriculum into territories their professors hadn't explored. Victor's hair had grayed at the temples, distinguished silver that probably cost more to maintain than Rob's monthly rent achieved through expensive colorist, who understood that gray needed to look intentional rather than accidental, wisdom earned rather than age surrendered to. The Brioni suit fit like architecture, every line precise, suggesting permanence and authority in the way that only truly expensive tailoring could achieve. Wedding ring number 3 caught the light as Victor gestured expansively, thanking mentors he carefully didn't name, acknowledging institutions without specificity, performing gratitude without actual vulnerability. The speech rolled out in waves of platitude that crashed against Rob's consciousness without leaving marks. Ethical leadership, fiduciary responsibility, the sacred trust between advisor and client. Each phrase landed like a blade between Rob's ribs, not because they hurt, but because they'd been hollowed out, turned into weapons that cut only one way, deployed to shield wrongdoing rather than illuminate truth. Victor spoke about building companies that serve humanity, about innovation's moral imperative, about responsibility to improve lives through breakthrough medications that addressed unmet needs. The audience nodded. Several took notes. Rob watched a young pharmaceutical executive in the front row, couldn't have been older than 35, gazing at Victor with expression of pure admiration, probably seeing future he wanted for himself, success story he planned to emulate. The audience applauded, standing ovation that rippled from front to back like stadium wave. Photographers swarmed the stage in coordinated chaos that had been carefully choreographed despite appearing spontaneous. Rob set down his glass and moved through the crowd with the invisibility that comes naturally to men his age, especially men whose names once meant something, but now carry only the faint stink of scandal that never quite washes off regardless of how many years pass. He'd learned this particular superpower during his first year in Millbrook, the ability to move through spaces without being noticed, to observe, without being observed, to exist in rooms without occupying them in ways that demanded acknowledgement. Victor finished his speech to final wave of applause that felt obligatory rather than earned, the kind of recognition that audience gives, because protocol demands it rather than because emotions compel it. The crowd thinned as guests migrated toward the silent auction tables that lined the ballroom's perimeter, displaying vacation packages and jewelry and experiences that Rob couldn't afford even if he'd wanted them. Victor turned, scanning for his next conversation with practiced efficiency of someone who understood networking as primary professional skill. His eyes moving across faces with calculation that suggested mental categorization: useful, not useful, potentially useful liability. Those eyes passed over Rob without recognition. That hurt more than Rob expected. Not the lack of memory Victor remembered that was certain. The kind of relationship they'd shared didn't evaporate even after decades of silence, but the theatrical quality of the dismissal, the performance of non-recognition that suggested Victor had practiced this moment, anticipated possibility of encountering Rob, and decided in advance how to handle it. As if Rob had become transparent through sheer irrelevance, as if 23 years of exile had erased him so completely that even eye contact would acknowledge existence Victor preferred to deny. Rob stepped closer, close enough to violate comfortable social distance, close enough that Victor couldn't pretend not to see him. His voice came out steady, a small victory after years of staying silent in situations that demanded speech. "Hello, Victor." The name landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples that spread outward from point of impact. Victor's face went through a progression of microexpressions that Rob cataloged with clinical precision, learned from 35 years of reading patients' faces to diagnose conditions they couldn't articulate. Surprise that lasted perhaps half a second, followed by rapid calculation as Victor processed implications of Rob's presence. Then fear, quickly suppressed like patients swallowing back nausea, and finally the mask sliding back into place with professional smoothness that would have fooled anyone who hadn't known him when they were young and ambitious and believed medicine would make them heroes. "Robert," Victor's voice carried warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "My God, I didn't realize you'd be here. The plaza doesn't check pedigrees at the door anymore. Standards have fallen." Rob kept his tone light, conversational, the kind of banter that old friends might exchange if their friendship hadn't ended in betrayal and destruction. Victor's laugh came too quickly, too loud, drawing attention from nearby guests who glanced over with mild curiosity before returning to their conversations. "How have you been? It's been, what, 20 years? 23. But who's counting?" Rob smiled in a way that didn't quite reach believable. "You've done well. $3 billion company. Impressive." The silence stretched between them, dense with history that couldn't be spoken in this room among these people, under these lights, that flattered everyone into versions of themselves that bore only passing resemblance to reality. Other guests drifted closer, sensing the tension without understanding its source, drawn to conflict, the way people slow down to observe accidents. Victor's wife, the third Mrs. Ashford, a former model named Isabella, whose face had graced magazine covers before she'd married wealth and traded beauty for security, materialized at her husband's elbow, with the timing of someone trained to extract him from uncomfortable situations, reading his body language with precision that suggested this was familiar role. "Darling." Isabella touched Victor's arm with practiced delicacy, her French accent making the endearment sound exotic rather than cloying. "The senator is asking for you, something about the healthcare committee." Victor seized the escape with visible relief that he tried to mask as reluctance. "Of course, Rob, we should catch up sometime, really talk. It's good to see you looking well." The lie hung between them, obvious and unchallenged. Rob didn't look well. He looked like what he was, a man approaching retirement, with nothing to retire from, wearing borrowed dignity and second-hand purpose. The kind of person who inspired sympathy rather than respect. His hair had thinned and whitened. His face had developed creases that spoke of stress and insufficient sleep. His hands showed tremor that came from too much coffee and not enough proper meals. But Victor was already moving away, his wife's hand on his arm, guiding him toward clusters of power and influence, surrounded again by the gravitational field of success that pulled people into his orbit and held them there through combination of charisma and calculated positioning. Rob watched him go, then reached into his jacket pocket and pressed record on the small digital recorder Catherine Wells had given him 2 weeks ago during their first meeting. "Just in case," she'd said, pressing the device into his hand with expression that suggested she expected nothing useful to come from it, but believed in covering all possibilities, just in case Victor says something useful. You never know when people slip. Rob had laughed at the time-bitter sound that surprised him with its harshness. Victor wouldn't confess at a gala surrounded by witnesses and phones capable of recording. Criminals didn't monologue outside of bad television shows written by people who'd never encountered actual crime. But the recorder was running now, capturing ambient sound time-stamping Rob's presence in this room at this moment, with digital precision that might matter later or might not matter at all. Not because Victor would confess, but because evidence was cumulative, built from tiny fragments that eventually formed mountains if you had patience to gather them and vision to see how scattered pieces fit together into pattern. Rob had learned patience. It was the one skill that 23 years of failure taught absolutely the curriculum that couldn't be rushed or avoided lessons delivered through repeated humiliation until you either learned or broke completely. He left the gala before dessert was served, walking out into Manhattan night that felt colder than the temperature-warranted April evening that still carried winter's ghost and wind that cut through his thin jacket. The subway ride back to Queens took 45 minutes, carrying him through layers of the city that's stratified by wealth and language and dream. Each stop marking transition to different economic reality, from Manhattan's glittering abundance to Queens's working-class dignity. By the time Rob climbed the 3 flights to his studio apartment in Astoria building that had been up and coming for 20 years without ever quite arriving, exhaustion had settled into his bones with familiar weight that felt almost comforting in its predictability. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it, small, clean, organized with the precision of someone who owned few enough possessions to care about placement of each item. 400 square feet that had contained everything Rob owned except memories which occupied unlimited space and refused to be organized. Books lined one wall, mostly financial theory and case studies from his Hopkins years, the kind of dense academic texts that no one read for pleasure, and that Rob kept partly from nostalgia and partly because disposing of them would feel like admitting his education had been wasted. Rob's laptop sat on the folding table that served as desk and dining surface, surrounded by neat stacks of papers and medical journals he subscribed to despite barely affording the fees. He opened the laptop and began typing notes about the gala documenting Victor's presence, the award, the brief conversation that had accomplished nothing except confirming they were enemies in ways that transcended professional disagreement. Nothing dramatic, just records that might matter later or might not matter at all. But Rob had learned through repeated failure that documentation was defense against both faulty memory and deliberate rewriting of history. Date, time, location, who attended, what was said. The mundane details that transformed lived experience into evidence. His phone rang at 11:30, the sound intrusive in apartment silence. Sarah's name on the screen brought a small warmth to his chest that he hadn't felt in hours, reminder that some relationships had survived his fall. "Hey, honey." Her voice carried stress underneath the greeting tightness that Rob recognized from 33 years of being her father. "Dad, did I wake you?" "You know I don't sleep before midnight." Truth was, Rob often didn't sleep until 2 or 3 a.m., lying awake cataloging regrets and planning investigations that might never happen. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, and in that pause, Rob heard the shape of the problem before she spoke it, the way emergency physicians learn to recognize crisis in patients' breathing pattern before vital signs confirm it. "I found something at work, an irregularity in a deal we're analyzing." "Dad, it's Victor Ashford's fund." Rob's hand tightened on the phone knuckles, going white. "Tell me." "Not over the phone. Can we meet for lunch tomorrow, that French place on Columbus that you like?" "Sarah, if this is what I think it is, tomorrow, please." Her voice broke slightly on the word vulnerability she rarely showed since becoming senior analyst at one of Manhattan's prestigious investment firms. "I need to show you document, and I need you to tell me I'm not crazy. Or if I am crazy, I need you to tell me that too. I need my father." Rob agreed immediately, knowing sleep would be impossible, now knowing the universe had just shifted in ways he couldn't fully process. After they hung up, he sat in darkness for a long time, watching headlights track across his ceiling from the street below, each beam of light temporarily illuminating water stains and cracks in plaster before darkness reclaimed them. Sarah had found something. His daughter, brilliant and careful and meticulous in ways that made her exceptional analyst working at Sterling Capital with no connection to Rob's past except blood, had independently stumbled into Victor Ashford's orbit and seen the patterns that others missed because they weren't looking for them. History didn't repeat. That was Twain's line, or a paraphrase of it, that had entered common usage until the original was obscured. History rhymed, and Rob could hear the rhythm starting again, the same meter that had destroyed him in 2002, but played in a different key with different instruments, and the terrible possibility that this time finally the melody would resolve into something other than defeat. Morning came slowly, dawn breaking over Queens in shades of gray and amber that turned familiar buildings into temporary monuments. Rob went through his routine with mechanical precision that required no conscious thought. Coffee made an elderly percolator that Margaret had bought at yard sale 20 years ago. Shower and bathroom where tiles needed regrouting. But Rob lacked energy and money to hire contractors. A walk to Angelo's Deli, where he met with small business owners who needed help understanding their own books, translating financial reality from numbers into decisions about whether they could afford to hire a nephew or needed to cut hours. Angelo Marchetti had receipts spread across the table when Rob arrived, worry creasing his 68-year-old face into deeper valleys that looked permanent. Angelo had owned the deli for 40 years, surviving through recessions and neighborhood changes and competition from chains that couldn't match his personal service, but could undercut his prices. These supplier invoices, Rob, the prices keep going up, but my margins keep shrinking. Something's not adding up. I trust Tony, he's family, but the numbers lie to nobody. Rob spent an hour with the numbers, coffee growing cold, while he traced patterns through receipts in invoices and bank statements, finding the problem in discrepancies that Angelo couldn't see because he trusted the wrong person, and trust created blind spots that careful examination revealed. Your nephew's been inflating supplier costs and pocketing the difference. About $30,000 over 2 years. Small amounts, each time, $50 here, $100 there, but it compounds. Angelo's face collapsed, aging 10 years in single moment. Tony, but his mother, my sister, she's been sick. He's supporting her, helping with the medical bills. If I accuse him, I know. Rob gathered the receipts into a neat stack, giving Angelo time to process betrayal. Family makes it harder, but business is survival. You confront him, offer to forget it if the money comes back and the theft stops. Or you prosecute. Those are your options. There's no third path that leads anywhere except deeper problems. Angelo chose mercy, as Rob knew he would, because family was worth more than money to men like Angelo, who'd built lives around loyalty and obligation. I'll talk to him tonight. Make him pay back what he took. But Rob, what happens next time? How do I trust him again? You don't. You verify. Toss but verify. It's Russian proverb, but it works in delicatessens too. Rob accepted the $150 that Angelo insisted on paying, despite protestations, and left feeling the familiar weight of other people's problems temporarily solved, knowing the real problem, broken trust, couldn't be fixed through accounting alone. The lunch with Sarah was at Le Mistral's small French restaurant that Rob had taken her to for birthdays when she was young, and he was still Hopkins researcher with tenure-track position and future that looked stable. They'd celebrated her acceptance to Wharton here, toasting with champagne that Rob could actually afford then, back when money was resource rather than constraint. Now Rob arrived early, claimed corner table where they could talk quietly, and ordered water because even coffee here cost $6. Sarah arrived 10 minutes later, looking exhausted in a way that concerned Rob's medical instincts. Dark circles under eyes, skin pale. Movements just slightly slower than normal, suggesting she'd been sleeping poorly for extended period. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Rob's monthly rent, but she wore it carelessly, tie slightly loosened, makeup minimal. The markers of someone who'd stopped caring about appearance because larger concerns had crowded out vanity. Dad? She hugged him tightly, holding on longer than usual, and Rob felt her trembling slightly. When she released him and sat down, her hands shook as she pulled manila folder from briefcase. Tell me, Rob said gently. Sarah opened the folder, spreading documents across table between their water glasses and breadbasket that arrived unordered. Financial statements, prospectuses, clinical trial data, the detritus of due diligence. Sterling is considering becoming limited partner in Millennium Fund. It's Victor's flagship investment vehicle, private equity focused on pharmaceutical companies. The returns are incredible. 22% annually for 5 years. Consistent, reliable. Everyone in the industry is jealous of his performance. But, Rob prompted, because there was always a but in stories like this. But I found inconsistencies when I started doing deep analysis. Reported asset valuations don't match independent appraisals. Cash flow statements show irregular patterns, money moving in ways that don't align with claimed investment strategies. And the auditor is a small firm in Delaware with questionable reputation. When I researched them, I found they've been cited twice by SEC for inadequate audit procedures. Sarah pulled out another document highlighting sections with trembling finger. Then I looked at Thornhill Pharmaceuticals itself. Their flagship drug Oxy Relief Pro has incredible market penetration, 2 million prescriptions written last year. But Dad, when I looked at adverse event reports filed with FDA, there's pattern nobody's talking about. Seizures, cardiac events, deaths that are being attributed to underlying conditions rather than drug toxicity. Rob felt ice forming in his chest. How many deaths? In official reports, 47, but I did independent analysis of VAIR's database vaccine adverse event reporting system, which also tracks drug complications, and found another 270 cases where Oxy Relief Pro was present but not listed as primary cause. 317 total deaths that might be connected to this drug. The number hung between them like accusation. 317 lives ended. 317 families destroyed. All so Victor could maintain revenue growth and stock price and personal wealth that had already exceeded what any reasonable person could spend in lifetime. Sarah, Rob chose words carefully, knowing what he was about to say would change her life in ways she couldn't fully anticipate. If you're right about this, if Victor's running Ponzi scheme while his pharmaceutical company sells dangerous drug, you're looking at biggest fraud case in decades. Billion-dollar lawsuit minimum. Criminal charges. People going to prison. I know. Sarah's voice was steady despite her shaking hands. That's why I came to you. Dad, I know what happened between you and Victor. I know he destroyed your career. I know there's personal history that might make you biased. But I need you to look at this data and tell me if I'm seeing patterns because they're real or because I want to see them because of what he did to our family. Rob studied his daughter's face so much like Margaret's, it sometimes hurt to look at her directly. Same determined jawline and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She'd been 5 when Rob's career imploded, old enough to feel impact, but too young to understand details. She'd grown up with father who'd gone from prestigious to pariah overnight, had endured whispered conversations when she was dropped off at school, had answered questions from classmates' parents about whether her dad was actually criminal. And she'd never blamed him, never asked him to explain or defend himself, just accepted that their life had changed and adapted to new reality with grace that Rob still didn't fully understand. Show me everything, Rob said. All the data, every inconsistency, and I'll tell you truth, whatever it is, regardless of my history with Victor. They spent next 3 hours at that table lunch, forgotten, while Sarah walked Rob through her analysis with precision that made him proud. She'd inherited his methodical approach to problems, his unwillingness to accept surface explanations when deeper investigation might reveal contrary reality. The data was damning. Millennium Fund showed signs of classic Ponzi scheme, consistent returns regardless of market conditions, overly complex investment strategies that couldn't be independently verified, auditor who rubber-stamped everything without actual scrutiny. But Thornhill Pharmaceuticals was worse. Sarah had discovered that Oxy Relief Pro's clinical trials showed statistical anomalies suggesting data manipulation. Enrollment criteria had excluded patients most likely to experience adverse reactions. Follow-up periods were suspiciously short-ending before long-term toxicity would manifest. Adverse events had been reclassified as unrelated to drug through mechanisms that Sarah couldn't fully trace but that smelled wrong to anyone familiar with pharmaceutical research. This is fraud, Rob said finally. Not speculation, not coincidence. Victor manipulated clinical trial data to get dangerous drug approved, then used its revenue to prop up Ponzi scheme that's paying early investors with new investor money. And when both schemes collapse, which they will inevitably thousands of people lose life savings while hundreds die from drug that should never have reached market. What do I do? Sarah's voice carried fear she'd been suppressing. If I report this to Sterling's board, they might investigate or they might bury it to avoid complications. If I go to SEC, I might be wrong and destroy my career over mistake. If I do nothing, I'm complicit in fraud that's killing people. Rob understood her dilemma because he'd faced identical choice 23 years ago in different contexts. The choice between safety and duty, between self-preservation and principle. It was choice that defined who you became the moment when you decided whether to look away or stand up, knowing standing up would likely destroy you, but looking away would destroy something worse. You report it, Rob said firmly, to SEC, to FDA, to whoever will listen. You document everything meticulously so your analysis can be verified independently. You protect yourself legally by ensuring you've followed proper channels. And then you prepare for what comes next. What comes next? Victor will attack you. Personally, professionally. He'll try to discredit your analysis, destroy your reputation, make you unemployable. That's his pattern. I learned it the hard way. But Sarah, you're his niece. Your mother was his younger sister who died too young. Does that give you protection? I don't know. Might make him hesitate, or might make him more vicious because betrayal by family hurts worse than enemy's attack. Sarah processed this silently and Rob saw decision forming in her eyes. I'm reporting it. Tomorrow, I'll give my analysis to Sterling's chief compliance officer and SEC simultaneously so Victor can't bury it through one channel. And Dad, I need you, not just as father, but as expert witness. You were Hopkins-trained researcher. You understand clinical trial methodology. Your testimony about data manipulation would carry weight. My testimony is worthless. I'm discredited ex-researcher who left academia under cloud and now works as small business consultant in Queens. Victor's lawyers will destroy me on stand. So we find allies who can't be destroyed, experts whose credentials are unimpeachable, journalists who've built careers on exposing fraud, government investigators who want big win before retirement. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fear transforming into determination. We build case so overwhelming that even Victor's money and influence can't overcome evidence. Rob felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with purpose, the sense that maybe this time the story would end differently. All right, we do this carefully, methodically, with every protection we can arrange. But Sarah, understand what you're choosing. This will take years. It will consume your life. Relationships will suffer. Career will stall or end. Mental health will deteriorate under stress. You'll question whether it's worth it dozens of times. Are you prepared for that? Are you asking me or yourself? Both. Sarah reached across table, took her father's weathered hands in her smooth ones. Dad, you've been preparing for this fight for 23 years. You just didn't know it. Everything you've learned about patience, about persistence, about surviving when everyone thinks you're finished, that's preparation for what comes next. Victor destroyed you once. This time we destroy him together. The words hung in air of small French restaurant, while around them other diners ate and laughed and conducted business, unaware that at corner table quiet declaration of war had just been made against one of pharmaceutical industry's most powerful figures. Rob felt tears sting his eyes but didn't hide them. Your mother would be proud of you. She would be proud of both of us. Sarah squeezed his hands, then released them and began gathering documents back into folder. Now let's figure out who we need on our side to make this work. They spent another hour planning strategy, identifying potential allies, discussing legal protections Sarah would need. By the time they left restaurant, evening had arrived and Manhattan was transforming into its nocturnal version. Lights coming on, professionals heading home, restaurants filling with dinner crowds. Rob walked Sarah to subway station, hugged her goodbye, with instruction to call him before taking any irreversible action, and then walked alone through city that had once been his home and now felt like museum, displaying artifacts of life he no longer lived. He returned to Queen's apartment and immediately began researching everything he could find about OxyRelief Pro, medical databases, clinical trial registries, FDA approval documents, adverse event reports that Sarah had mentioned. Patient forums where people discussed side effects in desperate attempts to understand what was happening to their bodies. The deeper he dug, the more convinced he became that Sarah was right. Oxy-Relief Pro was dangerous systematically and predictably in ways that Thornhill Pharmaceuticals must have known before drug ever reached market. At 2 a.m., Rob found article published in obscure medical journal that had been funded by Thornhill. The study claimed Oxy-Relief Pro had dramatically reduced addiction potential compared to traditional opioids. But Rob's trained eye caught irregularities in methodology that suggested conclusions were predetermined rather than discovered through legitimate research. Authors' disclosure statements buried in footnotes revealed that 5 of 6 researchers received consulting fees from Thornhill, totaling over $400,000 annually. The 6th author was Marcus Thornhill himself. Rob documented everything, creating spreadsheet that tracked adverse events, clinical trial anomalies, financial connections between researchers, and Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. By morning, he had 68 pages of analysis that could serve as roadmap for investigation if anyone with authority was willing to pursue it. The phone call came at 7 a.m. Unknown number. Rob answered anyway, too wired on coffee and lack of sleep to observe normal caution. Dr. Robert Morrison, male voice professional, careful. Speaking. My name is Detective Marcus Webb with NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. I received interesting complaint this morning from Sterling Capital's compliance officer regarding Millennium Fund and Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. Your daughter Sarah Brennan filed it. She listed you as expert witness with specific knowledge of defendant's history. Would you be willing to come in for interview? Rob felt everything shifting again, pieces moving on board he'd thought was fixed. Yes, when, today if possible. This is time sensitive. We need to act before anyone has chance to destroy evidence. Can you be at One Police Plaza by noon? I'll be there. Rob showered quickly, dressed in his one good suit that he kept for funerals and formal occasions, and took subway into Manhattan, feeling like he was stepping back into life he'd abandoned years ago. One Police Plaza loomed against morning sky, brutalist architecture that promised justice through sheer immovable weight. Inside, Detective Webb met him in lobby, African-American man in his 50s. Intelligent eyes that suggested he'd seen every type of crime and developed appropriate cynicism. Dr. Morrison, thank you for coming. Webb's handshake was firm but not aggressive. Let's talk in my office. The interview lasted 4 hours. Webb asked detailed questions about Rob's history with Victor, about Hopkins, years about the betrayal that had ended Rob's research career. Rob answered truthfully, holding nothing back, knowing that credibility required transparency, even when transparency revealed his own failures and mistakes. He explained that he'd trusted Victor completely, had believed their friendship transcended professional ambition, had been blindsided when Victor had orchestrated his destruction. And now your daughter independently discovers fraud connected to Ashford. Webb's tone suggested skepticism, the natural suspicion of an investigator who'd seen too many revenge schemes disguised as legitimate complaints. She works at Sterling Capital, has no connection to pharmaceutical industry, discovered irregularities through standard due diligence. I didn't ask her to investigate, didn't even know she was looking at anything connected to Victor until she called me yesterday. Webb studied Rob's face, looking for tells that would indicate deception. Apparently satisfied, he nodded. All right, here is situation. Your daughter's complaint is credible enough that we're opening preliminary investigation. FDA is being notified about drug safety concerns. SEC is reviewing Millennium Fund's filings. This is big, potentially criminal charges, including fraud, negligent homicide if we can prove Victor knew drug was dangerous, racketeering if pattern suggests ongoing criminal enterprise. How can I help? By being patient. Investigations like this take months, often years. We need to build case that can survive Victor Ashford's legal team, which means every piece of evidence needs to be bulletproof. Your role right now is to stay available. Don't talk to media. Don't do anything that could be construed as vigilante justice or harassment. Can you do that? Rob thought about 23 years of staying silent, of watching Victor succeed while he struggled. Could he be patient for months more, years? I can try. Trying isn't enough. This investigation fails if key witnesses become liabilities through impulsive actions. I need your commitment that you'll follow legal process even when it feels too slow. You have it. Rob meant it. He'd learned patience in harshest possible school. A few more months wouldn't kill him, and following proper procedures meant Victor couldn't escape through technical loopholes. Webb seemed satisfied. They discussed next steps protocols for maintaining evidence, communication procedures that would keep Rob informed without compromising investigation. As Rob was leaving, Webb called him back. "Dr. Morrison, one more thing. Victor Ashford has extensive resources and no moral constraints about using them. Watch your back. People who threaten his empire have history of experiencing unfortunate accidents or sudden legal problems that distract them from being effective witnesses." The warning settled in Rob's chest like cold weight. He nodded understanding and left, walking out into afternoon that felt different than morning had, brighter, somehow, despite gathering clouds that promised rain. Over next 2 weeks, Rob tried to maintain normal routine while feeling anything but normal. He worked his shifts. At Mercy General, he'd been splitting time between Queen's apartment and emergency room position in Millbrook, Tennessee, driving down for week-long shifts that paid better than consulting and work. His colleagues noticed something different about him: restless energy that manifested as extra attention to detail, double-checking prescriptions, reviewing patient histories with unusual thoroughness. Dr. Sarah Kim cornered him during rare quiet moment in ER. "Morrison, what's going on? You are wound tighter than I've ever seen you, and that's saying something, given how uptight you normally are." Rob considered whether to tell her, decided transparency was better than mysterious behavior that might raise questions later. "I'm involved in investigation of pharmaceutical company. Drug they manufacture might be dangerous. Can't discuss details yet, but it's consuming my attention." Kim's expression shifted from curious to concerned. "Which drug?" "Oxy-Relief Pro." "Shit." Kim leaned against wall, processing. "I've prescribed that. Maybe 20 patients over past year." "You're saying it's dangerous." "I'm saying it might be. Investigation is ongoing. But Sarah, if you have patients taking it, maybe monitor more closely. Watch for seizures, cardiac irregularities, neurological symptoms that don't fit other diagnoses. You realize if this becomes public and people find out I prescribed dangerous drug, I'm liable for malpractice suits." "We're all liable. Every doctor who trusted FDA approval and peer-reviewed research. That's why it's crucial to get truth out before more people are harmed." Rob paused, then decided to push further. "Will you document your Oxy-Relief Pro patients? Adverse events, complications, anything that seems wrong. If this goes to trial, having testimony from multiple physicians strengthens case." Kim studied him silently, weighing personal risk against professional duty. "Finally, I'll document everything. But Morrison, if you're wrong about this, if it turns out drug is safe and you're chasing ghosts, I want nothing to do with whatever comes next." Fair enough. That conversation repeated itself with variations over following weeks as Rob quietly contacted other physicians he knew, former colleagues from Hopkins, who'd stayed in academic medicine, emergency room doctors he'd met at conferences, rural practitioners who served communities similar to Millbrook. Not all agreed to help. Some dismissed his concerns as conspiracy theory or vendetta. But enough took him seriously that within 3 weeks, Rob had commitments from 17 physicians across 8 states to carefully document their Oxy-Relief Pro patients and watch for adverse events. The data started arriving in encrypted emails and secure file transfers. Case reports, lab results, patient histories. The pattern became undeniable. Oxy-Relief Pro was causing complications at rates far exceeding what Thornhill's clinical trials had reported. Not every patient experienced problems, but among those who did, severity ranged from troubling to fatal. Seizures that came without warning, cardiac arrhythmias that didn't respond to standard treatments, neurological damage that appeared permanent. Rob compiled everything into comprehensive database organizing by symptom type, patient, demographic, dosage, duration of use. The spreadsheet grew to 378 cases by end of first month. By second month, 542. Each row represented person whose life had been damaged by drug they'd trusted because doctor had prescribed it and FDA had approved it. The weight of it crushed Rob some nights. He'd lie awake thinking about how many patients he'd personally prescribed Oxy-Relief Pro to during his Mercy General shifts. 37. He could name most of them. Could remember faces, conversations, the trust in their eyes when he'd assured them this was safe and effective pain management. How many had experienced complications? How many had suffered or died because he trusted data that Victor had manipulated? Detective Webb called in mid-May with update. FDA is convening advisory committee to review OxyRelief Pro's safety profile. Hearing is scheduled for late June in Washington. They want your testimony. What about criminal investigation? Moving forward but slowly, building financial case against Millennium Fund, subpoenaing records from Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. Victor's lawyers are fighting every request which slows everything down. But we're making progress. How long until arrests? If we make arrests, probably year minimum, maybe two. I know that's not answer you want, but complex financial crimes take time to prosecute. We need ironclad case before bringing charges. Rob felt frustration building but suppressed it. Patience. He'd promised patience. Understood. Thank you for keeping me informed. After hanging up, Rob sat at his folding table and stared at database of injured patients. 542 cases, growing daily. Every day that passed meant more prescriptions written, more people exposed to danger, more complications developing. How many would suffer while investigators built their perfect case? How many would die waiting for justice that moved at bureaucratic pace designed for thoroughness rather than urgency? He called Sarah. The FDA hearing is in June, I'm testifying, but criminal investigation could take years. Years, Sarah's voice reflected his frustration. Dad, people are dying now. I know, but Webb says they need time to build case that survives Victor's legal defense. Rushing it means he might escape on technicalities. So we wait while he keeps selling poison and stealing money. Unless you have better idea. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then, what if we don't wait for criminal case? What if we pursue civil litigation? Class action lawsuit by patients harmed by OxyRelief Pro. That has lower burden of proof than criminal case preponderance of evidence rather than beyond reasonable doubt. And civil discovery might uncover documents that help criminal case move faster. Rob considered this. You'd need lead plaintiff, someone willing to put their name on lawsuit knowing Victor will attack them personally. Someone with clean record and sympathetic story that jury would respond to. I'll find them. You have database of 500 plus patients. Some of them will want justice badly enough to accept risk. Sarah, this isn't your fight. You reported fraud through proper channels. You've done your duty. Getting more involved means becoming target. I'm already target. Victor knows I filed complaint. He knows I'm working with investigators. Staying passive doesn't protect me. It just means I'm passive target instead of active one. At least fighting back gives me some control. Rob couldn't argue with logic that echoed his own reasoning. All right, but we need legal help. Class action litigation requires resources we don't have. Leave that to me. I have contacts in plaintiff's bar, lawyers who specialize in pharmaceutical injury cases. Some of them would take this on contingency if case is strong enough. Over next 2 weeks, Sarah made calls while Rob continued documenting cases. They found attorney named Michael Bradley, who specialized in medical device and pharmaceutical litigation, had won $400 million settlement against manufacturer of defective heart valve and had reputation for taking on powerful corporations despite personal cost. Bradley agreed to review their documentation. The meeting happened in Bradley's Midtown office, large firm, that occupied 3 floors of modern building with views of Hudson River. Bradley himself was 58, rumpled in expensive suit that had been slept in, with intelligent eyes that suggested shark lurking beneath mild-mannered surface. Rob and Sarah spread their documentation across conference table. Clinical trial anomalies, adverse event reports, financial analysis showing connections between research funding and favorable outcomes, database of 500-plus injured patients, 47 confirmed deaths with another 270 probable. Evidence that Thornhill Pharmaceuticals had known OxyRelief Pro was dangerous, but had suppressed data to maintain market approval. Bradley reviewed everything in silence for 90 minutes, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Finally, he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and smiled like predator who just spotted wounded prey. This is excellent. Strongest pharmaceutical injury case I've seen in decade. And you're saying criminal investigation is already underway? Preliminary investigation, Rob clarified. No charges yet. Even better, civil case proceeds independently And anything we discover through discovery process can be shared with prosecutors to accelerate criminal charges. Bradley's smile widened. DeMorris and Ms. Brennan, I'd be honored to represent plaintiffs in this case. Standard contingency 33% of any settlement or judgment. My firm fronts all costs, which will run into millions for expert witnesses and document review. Are you comfortable with those terms? Rob looked at Sarah. She nodded. Yes, Rob said, but we need guarantee that this isn't just about money. We want drug pulled from market. We want people protected. Settlement that leaves Oxy Relief Pro available doesn't serve our goals. Understood. I'll make removal from market condition of any settlement negotiations. And Dr. Morrison, I've researched your background. I know your history with Victor Ashford. Defense will absolutely use that to claim this lawsuit is motivated by personal vendetta rather than legitimate injury. How do you want to handle that? With truth, yes. Victor destroyed my career 23 years ago. Yes, I have personal reasons to want him held accountable, but evidence stands independent of my motivations. 500 plus injured patients didn't fabricate their complications because of my grudge. The data is real regardless of who compiled it. Bradley nodded approval. Good answer. Juries respect honesty even when honesty reveals bias. We'll address it head-on in opening statement, take away defense's biggest weapon by acknowledging it ourselves. They spent next 2 hours discussing strategy, identifying potential lead plaintiffs from Rob's database, planning timeline for filing lawsuit. By the time Rob and Sarah left Bradley's office, evening had arrived, and Manhattan was transforming into glittering nightscape that made impossible situations feel surmountable through sheer collective energy of millions of people pursuing millions of dreams. We're really doing this, Sarah said as they walked toward Subway. We're really doing this, Rob confirmed. Then because he needed to say it, Sarah, I'm proud of you. Your mother would be too. Don't make me cry on the subway. But Sarah's smile was worth every risk they were taking. The FDA hearing happened in late June in massive conference room at headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland. Advisory committee consisted of 12 medical experts, physicians, pharmacologists, statisticians, ethicists who would review OxyRelief Pro's safety profile and make recommendation about whether drugs should remain on market. Recommendation wasn't binding, but FDA typically followed advisory committee guidance unless politics intervened. The room was packed with journalists, pharmaceutical industry representatives, patient advocates, and curious observers. Rob sat at witness table with microphone and water pitcher facing panel, arranged in semicircle, that felt simultaneously like tribunal in theater. Sarah sat in the audience behind him, having taken personal day from work to attend. Detective Webb was there too, along with other investigators, watching proceedings with professional interest. Victor Ashford sat on opposite side of room with his legal team, 6 attorneys in expensive suits, who looked bored until proceedings actually began, then became intensely focused. Rob avoided making eye contact with Victor, understanding that any interaction would be interpreted as emotional rather than professional weakness, rather than strength. Dr. Patricia Chen, chair of advisory committee, called meeting to order. This hearing concerns safety review of OxyRelief Pro manufactured by Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. We'll hear testimony from concerned physicians, review adverse event data, examine clinical trial methodology, and make recommendation to FDA regarding drugs' continued marketing. Dr. Robert Morrison will present first. Rob approached microphone with folder containing his 90-minute presentation. He'd rehearsed until he could deliver key points without notes, until objections could be answered reflexively, until passion that drove investigation could be channeled into clinical precision that experts would respect. Members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Robert Morrison. I'm an emergency physician with 35 years experience, including 15 years at Mercy General Hospital in rural Tennessee. I'm here today because I prescribed OxyRelief Pro to 37 patients, and I've watched many of them develop complications that Thornhill's clinical trials claimed were statistically insignificant. He paused, letting weight of that sink in. I'm also here because my daughter, through completely independent analysis while conducting financial due diligence, discovered that Thornhill Pharmaceuticals manipulated clinical trial data to conceal OxyRelief Pro's dangers. What I'll present today isn't speculation or theory. It's observable reality documented by 17 physicians across 8 states affecting over 500 patients. For next 90 minutes, Rob presented case methodically. Patient data showing adverse events at rates far exceeding reported incidents. Pharmacological analysis explaining why Oxy-Relief Pro's metabolism pathway was inherently dangerous. Documentation of trial irregularities. Enrollment criteria designed to exclude high-risk patients, follow-up periods too short to capture long-term toxicity, adverse events systematically reclassified as unrelated to drug. The committee asked tough questions. Rob answered with clarity born from knowing he was absolutely right. This wasn't opinion or interpretation. This was measurable harm that could be independently verified by anyone willing to look honestly at evidence. Dr. Chen pressed hard on methodology. Dr. Morrison, your database of 500-plus patients, how was this compiled? Was it systematic review or convenience sample? Convenience sample initially, but I've since worked with epidemiologists to analyze whether sample is representative. Statistical analysis suggests complications occur in approximately 8% of Oxy-Relief Pro patients, which is 16 times higher than Thornhill's trials reported. But 80% means 92% don't experience problems. Couldn't this be acceptable risk-benefit profile for pain management? Rob leaned forward. Dr. Chen, 8% of 2 million users is 160,000 injured patients. Current documentation suggests fatality rate of approximately 2% among those who experience complications, meaning 3,200 deaths. Is that acceptable? 3,000 deaths, so Thornhill Pharmaceuticals can maintain revenue stream that could be replaced with safer alternatives. The number landed heavily. Rob saw several committee members react visibly. 3,000 deaths wasn't statistic. It was mass casualty event happening slowly enough that people didn't recognize it as connected phenomenon. Victor Ashford testified in afternoon. Rob remained in hearing room to watch, understanding that knowing enemies' arguments was crucial to defeating them. Victor took his seat at witness table with confidence of someone who'd testified before regulatory bodies dozens of times. He expressed deep concern about adverse events reported, acknowledged that all drugs carry risks that must be balanced against benefits, cited studies showing Oxy-Relief Pro helped millions manage chronic pain effectively, suggested that Dr. Morrison's concerns, while well-intentioned from a physician who clearly cares deeply about his patients, reflected selective data interpretation rather than comprehensive analysis of drugs' overall risk-benefit profile. It was masterful deflection. Victor didn't deny problems existed, couldn't given documentation, but reframed them as unavoidable side effects of any medication rather than evidence of systematic danger. He presented Thornhill's internal data showing robust safety monitoring and immediate reporting of any concerning trends to FDA. He noted that FDA's own surveillance hadn't triggered safety alerts, suggesting independent validation of Thornhill's position. The committee seemed receptive. Several nodded during Victor's testimony. Rob felt sick watching them buy performance that obscured reality beneath plausible-sounding medical jargon. During cross-examination, one committee member asked directly, "Dr. Ashford, are you aware of accusations that Thornhill Pharmaceuticals manipulated clinical trial data to minimize apparent risks?" Victor's response was smooth as glass. "I'm aware that disgruntled former colleagues and plaintiffs' attorneys seeking large settlements have made various accusations. As CEO, I can assure this committee that Thornhill followed all FDA protocols, disclosed all material safety information during approval process, and maintains highest ethical standards in all research activities. Any suggestion otherwise is either misunderstanding of complex pharmaceutical development process or deliberate mischaracterization by individuals with ulterior motives." Rob wanted to object to point out that Victor hadn't actually answered question, but protocols didn't allow interruption. He sat silently watching Victor deploy charm and credentials to deflect legitimate concerns. The hearing concluded at 6 p.m. with committee announcing they'd deliberate and issue recommendation within 60 days. Rob left feeling exhausted and uncertain. He'd presented strongest possible case, but Victor had countered effectively, and committee's body language suggested split decision ahead. Outside building Detective Webb approached. "Good testimony. You made strong case." Victor made strong counter case. That's his skill, making lies sound reasonable. but we're building criminal case that he can't talk his way out of. Financial forensics team has found evidence of money laundering through Millennium Fund, documents showing Victor personally approved trial data manipulations, email traffic between him and clinical research directors discussing how to hide adverse events. How long until you have enough for charges? Months, maybe 6. I know that's not an answer you want. It's the answer I expected. Rob sighed. Thank you for the update. And Webb, when you do bring charges, make them count. Victor's clever and connected. If Case has any weaknesses, he'll exploit them. That's why we're being thorough. Rob returned to Queens feeling simultaneously energized and depleted. The hearing had gone as well as could be expected, but expectations had been tempered by decades of watching systems protect powerful people from consequences they deserved. Sarah called that evening. I watched whole thing. Dad, you were incredible. The way you presented data-handled questions, you reminded me why you were chief resident at Hopkins. Victor was more incredible. He turned legitimate safety concerns into debate about acceptable risk-benefit ratios. Committee, maybe, but you planted seeds of doubt. That's all we needed from this hearing, getting official record of concerns, so when civil lawsuit proceeds and more evidence emerges, committee looks negligent for not acting sooner. That's cynical strategic thinking. I learned from expert. Sarah's tone softened. Bradley filed the class action lawsuit this afternoon. 47 lead plaintiffs representing different injury categories, seizures, cardiac events, neurological damage deaths. Media coverage starts tomorrow. This becomes public fight now. Victor will attack. Let him. We're ready. They weren't ready. Couldn't be not really because Victor's counterattack exceeded anything Rob had anticipated, despite knowing Victor was capable of extraordinary malice. The articles started appearing within 48 hours, not in legitimate news outlets, but in medical trade publications and pharmaceutical industry journals. Disgraced researcher mounts vendetta against former colleague. Professional jealousy masquerading as patient safety concerns. Class action lawsuit appears motivated by financial gain rather than legitimate medical concerns. Each article was carefully crafted to seem objective while planting doubts. They recounted Rob's career trajectory, early promise at Hopkins, followed by questions about research methodology that led to resignation, false he'd been pushed out but technically had resigned, years of obscurity in rural emergency medicine, estrangement from academic medicine due to inability to meet publication standards, another fabrication. Now conveniently, he'd discovered pharmaceutical fraud just when his former friend and colleague had achieved success Rob never had. The affair with Margaret was leaked. Tabloids ran stories about love triangle behind pharmaceutical lawsuit. Cable news debated whether Rob's medical concerns were legitimate or elaborate revenge scheme motivated by romantic betrayal. Comment sections filled with armchair psychologists analyzing his motivations while ignoring actual evidence of harm. Sarah faced similar attacks. Analyst pushes employer into lawsuit against family member's rival. The narrative suggested Sarah was helping father pursue grudge, that her analysis was biased by filial loyalty, that Sterling Capital had allowed junior analysts' emotional investment to override institutional judgment. Rob unplugged television after a particularly vicious segment on conservative news network suggested he was trial lawyer's tool seeking jackpot justice at expense of pharmaceutical innovation. He stopped reading comments online, stopped checking news coverage, focused instead on what he could control: documentation, coordination with plaintiff attorneys, preparation for depositions that would begin soon. Then FBI showed up at Mercy General. Special Agent Rodriguez introduced herself with credentials and expression, suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. Dr. Morrison, we're following up on complaint filed against you regarding potential Medicare fraud. Questions about billing practices, documentation standards, possible inappropriate prescribing. Would you be willing to answer some questions? Rob's stomach dropped, but training kicked in. I'll cooperate fully, but I'd like attorney present. That's your right. Though, I should mention, having attorney makes this look like you have something to hide. Having attorney makes this look like I understand how these investigations work. Rob called lawyer that Bradley had recommended Daniel Park, former federal prosecutor, who specialized in defending physicians against regulatory actions. Park arrived within 2 hours, expensive suit and calm demeanor, suggesting nothing worried him. After brief private consultation with Rob, he addressed Agent Rodriguez. My client will cooperate completely, but let's establish ground rules. This appears to be fishing expedition motivated by external pressure rather than legitimate concerns about my client's practice. We'll answer your questions truthfully but won't be intimidated into admissions that aren't warranted by facts. The investigation took 3 weeks. FBI agents reviewed every chart, every prescription, every billing statement from Rob's 2 years at Mercy General. They interviewed colleagues, patients, administrators. They searched for any deviation from standard practices that could be characterized as fraud or incompetence. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Rob practiced defensive medicine precisely because he'd learned painful lesson about documentation's importance. Every decision was justified in chart notes. Every prescription was appropriate for diagnosis. Every billing code matched services rendered. Agent Rodriguez apologized when closing investigation. Dr. Morrison, I'm sorry for inconvenience. The complaint was baseless. We found no evidence of inappropriate conduct. Who filed complaint? Rob asked, though he already knew. Anonymous, but it came through channels suggesting pharmaceutical industry source. Rodriguez hesitated, then added, off record, this has Thornhill Pharmaceuticals written all over it. Classic intimidation tactic. Target down an investigation that wastes time and damages reputation, even though no charges result. I see it frequently in cases involving corporate whistleblowers. Can you tell me that on record? No, but I can tell you this. Keep documenting everything, because next attack will be more sophisticated. Next attack came week later. Local newspaper in Millbrook ran story, Mercy General Doctor under FBI investigation for Medicare fraud. The story was technically accurate, investigation had occurred, but omitted crucial detail that investigation had closed without findings. Damage was done. Patients started requesting different physicians. Hospital administrator called Rob into office for a conversation about recent publicity. Dr. Margaret Hayes, 62-year-old administrator who'd run Mercy General for 20 years, looked genuinely pained. Rob, I don't believe you did anything wrong. Investigation cleared you. But we're getting calls from patients worried about their care, from board members concerned about hospital's reputation. I need to place you on administrative leave while we do internal review. Internal review of what? FBI already reviewed everything. I know, but perception matters. If patients don't trust you, we can't have you treating them. It's not fair, but it's reality. Rob understood. Hospital was small, vulnerable to public pressure, couldn't afford to defend physician, when doing so might alienate community. How long? 30 days, paid leave. We'll complete review, issue statement, supporting you, bring you back. It's procedure, Rob, not judgment. Rob cleared out his locker, drove back to Queens, feeling numb. 23 years ago, Victor had destroyed his research career. Now Victor was destroying clinical career too. How many times could one man be demolished before nothing remained? He called Sarah from an apartment that felt simultaneously too small and too empty. They put me on administrative leave. FBI investigation cleared me, but hospital can't handle publicity. Dad, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have anticipated Victor would attack your employment. Not your fault. This is what I signed up for when I agreed to fight. I just didn't expect it to be quite so effective, quite so fast. What do you do now? I wait. Hospital will bring me back after 30 days. Meanwhile, I focus on preparation for civil trial. Bradley says depositions start next month. Are you okay? Really, Rob considered question honestly. Was he okay? No, he was angry and humiliated and exhausted. But he'd been all those things before and survived. I'm functional. That's close enough to okay for government work. Sarah laughed, though it sounded forced. I love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart. After hanging up, Rob sat in darkening apartment and made decision. Passive defense wasn't working. Victor could attack endlessly while Rob tried to maintain normal life that grew smaller with each assault. Time to change strategy. Time to stop reacting and start acting. He called Rachel Warren at Boston Globe. Warren had been investigating financial fraud for 15 years, won Pulitzer for exposing corruption in medical device industry. If anyone could help him tell story properly, build public pressure that Victor couldn't deflect through paid articles and character assassination, it was Warren. Ms. Warren, My name is Dr. Robert Morrison. I have a story about pharmaceutical fraud that's killing thousands of people. And I have evidence that your readers need to see. Rachel Warren agreed to meet Rob at a coffee shop near the Globe's Boston office's neutral territory, where neither pharmaceutical industry lawyers nor law enforcement would think to monitor. She arrived 15 minutes early. Reporters habit establishing position before subject arrived and watched Rob enter with the careful assessment of someone who'd interviewed hundreds of sources and learned to distinguish credible whistleblowers from attention seekers within first 30 seconds. Rob looked terrible. That was Warren's first thought. Not the polished deterioration of someone playing victim for sympathy, but genuine exhaustion that came from months of stress and insufficient sleep. His suit was clean, but worn at the elbows. His face carried lines that hadn't been there in the Hopkins faculty photo Warren had found during preliminary research. This was man who'd been ground down by circumstances, but refused to stay down, kept standing through sheer stubbornness. Dr. Morrison, Warren extended her hand. Thank you for reaching out. I've been following the Oxy Relief Pro story. Your FDA testimony was compelling, but not compelling enough. Rob sat heavily ordered black coffee from hovering waitress. Advisory committee will probably split decision. Drug stays on market with stronger warning labels. More people die while lawyers debate acceptable risk levels. That's why you called me. You want public pressure that regulators can't ignore. Warren pulled out notebook old school reporter who still took handwritten notes despite living in digital age. Tell me everything. Start from beginning. Don't leave out details because you think they're not interesting. I'll decide what matters. For 3 hours, Rob talked about discovering patterns in emergency room, about Sarah's independent analysis, about compiling database now containing 500 plus injured patients, about FBI investigation into his practice that had been weaponized harassment, about systematic attacks designed to destroy his credibility before evidence could be properly heard. He showed her documents, clinical trial data with statistical anomalies, highlighted adverse event reports that had been reclassified to hide patterns, financial connections between Thornhill Pharmaceuticals and researchers who'd validated Oxy Relief Pro's safety. Warren asked hard questions, probed for weaknesses in his evidence, challenged his interpretations, tested whether he'd hold up under scrutiny that would come when story published. Rob answered everything with clinical precision that came from decades of differential diagnosis, presenting evidence, acknowledging uncertainties, distinguishing between what he knew absolutely and what he strongly suspected based on available data. Finally, Warren closed her notebook. This is Pulitzer-level story if I can independently verify everything you've shown me. But Dr. Morrison, you need to understand what publishing this means. Victor Ashford will come after me with everything he has. Lawyers threatening libel suits. Public relations firms planting counter-narratives pressure on Globe's advertisers. And he'll escalate attacks on you. Right now, you're witness in civil lawsuit. After my story runs, you'll be face of campaign against pharmaceutical industry worth billions. That makes you target worth destroying completely. I know. Rob's voice was steady. I've already lost research, career been driven from academic medicine, had my marriage exposed as sham, been investigated by FBI, lost hospital privileges. What else can he take? My apartment, my car. They're not worth taking. My reputation already destroyed. My relationship with daughter Sarah is standing with me regardless. I'm 61 years old with nothing valuable left except my conscience. And I keep that by fighting, not by surrendering. Warren studied him for a long moment. She'd heard similar speeches from whistleblowers before, brave declarations that crumbled when actual cost became clear. But something in Rob's voice suggested this wasn't performance. This was man who'd already survived worst outcome and discovered he could keep living anyway. That made him dangerous opponent, nothing left to lose except self-respect, and that only disappeared through cowardice. All right, Warren said. Give me 6 weeks. I'll investigate independently, verify every claim, build airtight case. Then we publish. But Morrison, she leaned forward, a voice dropping. When this breaks, you stay visible. Do interviews. Tell your story. Make yourself sympathetic figure that Thornhill can't easily dismiss. Right now, you're a disgraced researcher with grudge. After my story, you can become concerned physician who discovered massive fraud. Narrative matters as much as evidence. I'm not good at media. You'll learn or you'll fail. Those are the options. Over next 6 weeks, Warren conducted an investigation that would eventually win her second Pulitzer. She interviewed 43 patients from Rob's database documenting injuries in detail that made abstract statistics into human tragedy. She found 3 former Thornhill employees who'd witnessed data manipulation during OxyRelief Pro trials and who agreed to speak on record despite non-disclosure agreements that threatened financial ruin if breached. She consulted independent pharmacologists who reviewed metabolism pathways and confirmed OxyRelief Pro's inherent dangers. She obtained internal Thornhill documents through source who remained anonymous even to Warren documents showing executives had discussed adverse events in terms of acceptable casualties necessary to maintain market position. Most damning, Warren discovered that Victor Ashford had personally overruled safety officer who'd recommended additional trials before seeking FDA approval. Email chain showed Victor writing, "We're within legal parameters of disclosed risk. Additional trials delay market entry by 18 months and cost $40 million. Risk-benefit analysis favors proceeding. Dr. Patterson, if you're not comfortable with this decision, perhaps you'd be happier elsewhere." Dr. Patricia Patterson had resigned 2 weeks later. Warren tracked her down in Oregon, where she'd retreated from pharmaceutical industry to teach high school chemistry. Patterson was 54, haunted by decision to stay silent when speaking up might have prevented tragedy. "I knew OxyRelief Pro was dangerous," Patterson told Warren during the interview conducted in Patterson's modest home. "The metabolism pathway created toxic metabolites that accumulated in certain patients, those with specific genetic variations affecting enzyme function. I told Victor we needed to do genetic screening studies before broad release. He said it was too expensive and would limit market size. When I pushed harder, he made it clear my career was over if I didn't drop it. Why didn't you report it to FDA? I tried, filed adverse event reports during post-market surveillance. But Thornhill's legal team challenged every report, got them reclassified as unrelated to drug. Eventually I gave up, moved away, tried to forget." Patterson's voice broke. "How many people died because I wasn't brave enough to keep fighting?" Warren's story ran on front page of Boston Globe on Tuesday morning in August. Massive expose under headline, "Deadly by Design: How Thornhill Pharmaceuticals Brought Dangerous Drug to Market Despite Known Risks." The article was 7,000 words, spanning 3 full pages, accompanied by photographs of injured patients who'd agreed to be identified, charts showing adverse event patterns, and sidebar explaining complex science in terms general readers could understand. The impact was immediate and volcanic. By noon, story had been picked up by every major news outlet. CNN ran special report. New York Times published follow-up investigation. Wall Street Journal analyzed financial implications. Senator Elizabeth Warren, no relation to Rachel, called for congressional hearings. FDA announced emergency review of OxyRelief Pro. Justice Department confirmed criminal investigation into Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. Thornhill's stock price dropped 42% in single trading day, wiping out $1.3 billion in market capitalization. By end of week, Victor had been forced to resign as CEO. Board of directors installed interim leadership while companies scrambled to contain crisis. Rob's phone rang continuously. News outlets requesting interviews. Patient advocacy groups thanking him. Lawyers from other pharmaceutical injury cases asking for consultation. His daughter called from Sterling, Capital voice shaking with emotion he hadn't heard since Margaret's death. "Dad, I'm watching you on CNN right now. You're a hero. They're calling you David who took down Goliath. Senator Warren just mentioned you by name, said you represent what's best about medical profession, willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for patient safety. I'm not hero, I'm just stubborn man who couldn't stay silent." But Rob felt something unfamiliar, pride maybe, or validation after 23 years of doubt. "You're my hero," Sarah said quietly, "and Mom would be so proud. Despite everything, the affair, the complications, she would be proud." Rob felt tears sting his eyes but didn't hide them. At 61, he'd earned right to cry when circumstances warranted. "Thank you, honey. That means more than you know." The counterattack was swift and coordinated. Thornhill's crisis management firm launched multi-pronged campaign within 48 hours. Full-page advertisements in major newspapers citing independent studies that validated OxyRelief Pro's safety profile. Press releases featuring testimonials from pain management specialists who disclosed consulting fees from Thornhill. In footnotes, nobody read defending drugs' necessity for patients with chronic pain. Op-eds in medical journals warning about regulatory overreach and trial lawyer interference with pharmaceutical innovation. More insidiously, attacks on Rob intensified. Conservative media outlets framed story as example of activist journalism, collaborating with vengeful ex-colleague to destroy successful company. They dug deeper into Rob's past, found patients who died under his care during emergency room shifts, inevitable outcome of decades practicing emergency medicine, and presented deaths as evidence of incompetence rather than tragic complexity of medical practice. One particularly vicious segment on cable news showed photo of Rob next to photo of Victor, captioned, "Failure versus Success, Understanding the Real Motivation Behind Pharmaceutical Lawsuit." The host's face shining with righteous certainty explained how Rob represented mediocrity's resentment of excellence, and how disgruntled people who couldn't succeed in competitive fields often attack those who can. Rob watched it once, then turned off television. Bradley had warned him this would happen. Warren had prepared him for it. Still hurt to see life reduced to caricature, complexity, flattened into narrative that serves someone else's agenda. But public opinion was shifting in Rob's favor, despite Thornhill's best efforts. Patient stories were too compelling. Evidence was too strong. Rachel Warren's reporting was too thorough to be dismissed as biased. Within 2 weeks of initial story, 3 more major newspapers published independent investigations confirming Globe's findings. International media picked up story revealing that Oxy Relief Pro had caused similar problems in European markets, where Thornhill had suppressed adverse events through different regulatory arbitrage scheme. Then came the development that transformed everything. Victor's own family became victim. Sarah Mitchell was 17 years old junior at prestigious prep school in Nashville, daughter of Victor Ashford's younger sister, Jennifer. Sarah had been prescribed Oxy Relief Pro 6 months earlier for chronic back pain following car accident. She'd taken medication exactly as prescribed, had experienced some mild dizziness initially, but nothing that seemed concerning. Her mother mentioned it to Victor during family gathering, who assured her the dizziness was temporary adjustment period and Sarah should continue medication. 3 weeks after Globe story published, Sarah Mitchell collapsed during soccer practice. Seizures, cardiac arrest, coach called 911. Ambulance rushed her to Vanderbilt Medical Center, where trauma team fought for 45 minutes to stabilize her. She survived but suffered permanent kidney damage and neurological deficits that would require lifetime management. Blood work showed toxic levels of Oxy Relief Pro metabolites. Genetic testing revealed she carried enzyme variation that made her unable to properly metabolize the drug, exactly the population that Dr. Patterson had warned should be screened before prescription. Jennifer Mitchell called Rob directly, having gotten his number through Sarah Brennan. Rob answered, not knowing who was calling, heard woman's voice breaking with grief and rage. "Dr. Morrison, this is Jennifer Mitchell, Victor Ashford's sister. I need to talk to you about Oxy Relief Pro. It nearly killed my daughter. It's caused permanent damage, and my brother knew it was dangerous." Rob drove to Nashville the next day, met Jennifer and her daughter at their home in upscale suburb that wealth couldn't protect from tragedy that struck randomly. Sarah Mitchell lay on couch, pale and diminished 17-year-old who'd been varsity athlete 3 weeks ago and now struggled to walk across room without assistance. "Tell me everything," Rob said gently, sitting across from them with notebook open. Jennifer spoke for 2 hours, describing Sarah's prescription progressive symptoms that had been dismissed as minor side effects, the collapse that had nearly killed her. She showed Rob medical records, prescription bottles, text exchanges with Victor, where she'd expressed concerns and he'd reassured her. "He knew," Jennifer said, voice flat with certainty. "My brother knew this drug was dangerous and he told me to keep giving it to my daughter. For 6 months, while she was being poisoned." She looked at Rob with eyes that had cried until no tears remained. "I need you to help me. Not for money, we have money. For accountability. Victor needs to face what he's done. He needs to see Sarah and understand that his decisions have consequences that can't be fixed with lawyers and public relations." "I'll help." Rob closed notebook. "But Jennifer, you need to understand, testifying against your brother will destroy your family. Relationships will fracture. People will take sides. Holidays will become battlefields. Are you prepared for that? My daughter can't play soccer anymore, can't run, has to take medication for rest of her life because her kidneys don't function properly. Victor did that to her for profit. Family was already destroyed the moment he put money ahead of Sarah's safety. Rob brought Sarah Mitchell's case to Bradley, who immediately recognized its value. This is nuclear weapon. CEO's own niece damaged by his drug prescribed based on his personal assurance it was safe. Defense can't claim she or biased or motivated by vendetta when victim is defendant's family member who trusted him completely. Bradley filed supplemental complaint adding Sarah Mitchell as named plaintiff. Media coverage exploded again. Ashford's own niece injured by Oxy Relief Pro dominated news cycles. Public opinion, which had been divided between supporting Rob and supporting Thornhill, solidified against Victor. Even conservative outlets that had defended pharmaceutical industry found it difficult to explain away Uncle poisoning his niece through greed and negligence. Victor called Rob directly for first time in 23 years. Rob's phone rang at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. James? Victor's voice sounded older, strained, the confident charisma completely absent. We need to talk. About what? About how you destroyed my career, about how your drug is killing people, about how you poisoned your own niece because admitting problems would hurt your stock price. About ending this before more damage is done to everyone involved. Victor paused. I know what you think of me. You think I'm monster. Maybe you're right. But James, this crusade you're on, it's destroying both of us. And it won't bring back the people who died. Won't fix Sarah Mitchell's kidneys. It's just revenge at this point. It's accountability. There's difference. Semantic distinction. Victor sighed heavily. I'm offering you a deal. Drop the lawsuit. Stop talking to media. Let this fade away. In exchange, I'll fund medical care for every patient you have documented, full coverage, lifetime, no limits. We're talking $50 million minimum. You can actually help your patients instead of just using their suffering for litigation. It was a brilliant offer, exactly calculated to hit Rob's core motivation. He wanted patients helped. Victor was offering a way to achieve that without years of litigation uncertainty. But accepting meant abandoning justice, meant allowing Victor to buy his way out of consequences while continuing to profit from fraud. No, Rob said firmly. Withdraw Oxy Relief Pro from market immediately. Issue voluntary recall. Admit what you've done. Take responsibility publicly. Then we can discuss how to help injured patients. You're asking me to commit corporate suicide. Board would never approve voluntary recall without FDA mandate. Shareholders would sue. Company would collapse. Tens of thousands of employees would lose jobs. You think that's moral outcome? I think moral outcome is stopping the poisoning before more people are harmed. Your employees can find other jobs. Dead patients can't be resurrected. So self-righteous. So certain you're right. Victor's voice turned, cold mask slipping to reveal anger underneath. You know what I remember about you from Hopkins? How you judged everyone. How you thought you were morally superior because you followed rules. But following rules doesn't make you a good person, James. It just makes you an inflexible person who can't navigate complexity. And breaking rules doesn't make you innovative. It makes you criminal who endangered thousands for profit. Rob felt his own anger rising. You want to know what I remember? I remember you were brilliant, could have been great physician, could have saved lives through legitimate research. Instead, you chose shortcuts, chose money over medicine, and now you're trying to buy your way out of accountability by offering to help people you harmed in first place. That's not morality, Victor. That's arrogance masquerading as generosity. Silence stretched between them, decades of divergent choices compressed into a single moment of mutual understanding. They'd been friends, once colleagues who'd shared idealism about medicine's potential. That person Victor had been, or might have been, no longer existed if he ever truly had. Last chance, Victor said. Drop lawsuit, take the money, help your patients, walk away. Go to hell. Victor hung up. Rob sat in darkness of his apartment phone, still in hand, understanding that bridge was permanently burned now. No more possibility of reconciliation or compromise. This would end with one of them completely destroyed. 2 days later, FBI agents arrested Victor Ashford at his Boston home on charges of wire fraud, securities fraud conspiracy to distribute misbranded drugs, and criminally negligent homicide. Detective Webb had finally assembled an ironclad case that Victor's lawyers couldn't dismiss. The perp walk became iconic image Victor, in handcuffs being led out of mansion worth $12 million, wearing expensive suit now rumpled from arrest, face showing shock that quickly transformed into calculation as he realized cameras were recording. He said nothing, lawyers having instructed silence, but his eyes swept across gathered media with expression that promised retaliation. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Park held press conference announcing charges. Today, we charge Dr. Marcus Victor Ashford with orchestrating massive fraud that endangered public health for personal profit. Evidence shows defendant knowingly manipulated clinical trial data, suppressed adverse event reports, and distributed dangerous drug despite full awareness of risks. Estimated financial fraud exceeds 800 million. Estimated victims number in thousands. This is one of the largest pharmaceutical fraud cases in American history. Rob watched press conference from his Queens apartment, Sarah beside him, both holding cups of coffee that had gone cold while they stared at television screens showing Victor being arraigned. Bail was set at $10 million. Victor posted it immediately through bondsman walking out of courthouse 6 hours after arrest. "Is it over?" Sarah asked quietly. "Now that he's been arrested, is the fight finished?" No, Rob understood that arrest was beginning of different battle, not end of current one. Geez. Now comes trial. Victor has best lawyers money can buy. They'll attack evidence, attack witnesses, create reasonable doubt however possible. And trial could take a year, maybe two. We're in this for long haul. Are you prepared for that? Rob thought about 23 years of exile, about patients he'd failed by prescribing dangerous drug, about Sarah Mitchell lying on couch unable to play soccer. I've been preparing my whole life, just didn't know it until now. Over following weeks, preliminary hearings revealed scope of federal case. Prosecutors had obtained internal Thornhill documents through warrant execution, showing Victor had personally approved strategies to conceal adverse events. Email chains demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Victor writing to subordinates about managing perception and minimizing exposure rather than addressing actual safety concerns. Financial forensics revealed Victor had sold $47 million in Thornhill stock 2 months before Globe story published, suggesting he'd anticipated crisis and profited from insider knowledge. Defense attorneys argued that Victor had relied on expert advice from qualified researchers, that complexity of pharmaceutical development meant honest disagreements about risk assessment were inevitable, that criminalizing business decisions made in good faith would chill innovation. They portrayed Victor as scapegoat for systemic problems in FDA approval process. One man being held responsible for failures that were institutional rather than individual. Judge Sarah Matthews, federal judge, known for harsh sentences in white-collar crime scheduled trial for following spring, gave both sides 9 months to prepare. Rob would be key witness for prosecution, asked to explain medical evidence in terms jury could understand, while defending his own credibility against a tax defense would certainly launch. Meanwhile, civil lawsuit proceeded on parallel track. Bradley scheduled depositions with current and former Thornhill employees, expert witnesses, patients who'd been injured. Each deposition revealed more evidence of systematic fraud patterns that couldn't be explained as innocent mistakes or honest disagreements. Rob attended every deposition that his schedule allowed, watching Bradley methodically dismantle defense narratives through careful questioning. One particularly devastating deposition involved Dr. Thomas Werner, former clinical research director who'd overseen Oxy-Relief Pro trials. Werner was 63, career pharmaceutical researcher who'd left Thornhill under mysterious circumstances 2 years earlier. Bradley questioned Werner for 6 hours, slowly extracting admissions that painted a damning picture. Yes, enrollment criteria had excluded patients most likely to experience complications. Yes, adverse events had been reclassified using medically questionable reasoning. Yes, Victor had pressured research team to deliver results that supported commercialization timeline rather than following data wherever it led. Dr. Werner, Bradley leaned forward during crucial exchange. Did you ever express concerns directly to Dr. Ashford about Oxy-Relief Pro's safety? Werner hesitated, loyalty to former employer warring with obligation to tell truth under oath. Finally, yes, multiple time. I told Victor we needed additional trials. That metabolism data suggested significant population would experience toxic accumulation. that we were rushing to market without adequate safety information. What was Dr. Ashford's response? He said the data was adequate for FDA approval, that additional trials would cost too much and delay revenue, that I was being overly cautious. Werner's voice dropped. He said if I wasn't comfortable with company's risk tolerance, perhaps I should find position elsewhere that better matched my temperament. Was that threat? I interpreted it as such, and when I continued raising concerns, I was reassigned to different projects, eventually pressured to accept early retirement package. Dr. Werner, in your expert medical opinion, was Oxy Relief Pro safe for general population prescription? Long pause. Then no, it required genetic screening to identify high-risk patients or restricted use in supervised settings. Broad prescription to general population was negligent, given known metabolism issues. Bradley entered Werner's testimony into record. Rob felt satisfaction watching defense attorneys realize their own former employee had provided testimony that undermined every argument they'd planned to make. This was how justice worked when pursued patiently, accumulated evidence becoming mountain that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. But victories and depositions didn't translate to peace in daily life. Rob remained on administrative leave from Mercy General Hospital, having decided his publicity made him liability they couldn't afford. He worked as consultant on pharmaceutical injury cases, testimony fees, providing income, but nothing like security of regular employment. His relationship with old colleagues frayed, some supportive, others uncomfortable, being associated with someone who challenged pharmaceutical industry they all depended on. Most painful was isolation that came from being constantly visible. Every interview, every deposition, every court appearance was covered by media. Rob couldn't go to grocery store without being recognized, couldn't have private conversation without worry. It would be recorded and leaked. Fame that looked glamorous from outside felt like prison from within. Constant scrutiny, constant judgment, constant demands to be perfect spokesman for cause larger than himself. He called Sarah one evening after a particularly exhausting day of depositions. How do you handle it, being public figure when you are a private person? Dad, I'm not public figure. I filed complaint and testified. But you're the face of this fight. Media wants your story because it's compelling disgraced researcher, vindicated David versus Goliath narrative. That's burden you carry that I don't. I didn't ask for burden. None of us ask for burdens we receive. We just decide whether to carry them or put them down. Sarah paused. Did you want to put it down? Walk away. Bradley could continue lawsuit without you. Prosecutors could proceed with a criminal case. You could disappear back into obscurity. Rob considered it honestly. Disappearing was tempting. Returning to Queen's apartment and small business consulting, letting others fight battles while he recovered whatever peace remained available. But every time temptation arose, he thought about Sarah Mitchell, unable to play soccer, about Caleb Henderson still having seizures, about 317 confirmed deaths from drug that should never have reached market. No, Rob said, I can't walk away. These people, the injured patients, the families of people who died, they need someone who understands both medicine and what it's like to be destroyed by Victor. I'm uniquely positioned to be that person. Refusing would be cowardice. Then stop complaining about burden you've chosen to carry. Sarah's voice softened to take sting from words. I love you, Dad, and I'm proud of you, but martyrdom doesn't become you. Fight because it's right, not because it's noble suffering. She was correct as usual. Rob had tendency towards self-pity that he needed to check. This wasn't about his suffering. It was about preventing others from suffering. The breakthrough came in November. Rachel Warren called with news that would shift entire case onto different axis. Morrison, I found Isabella Ashford, Victor's wife. Third wife, the former model. She's been in hiding since Victor's arrest, left their home, filed for divorce, disappeared. I tracked her to sister's house in Vermont, and she wants to talk. She has evidence that Victor knowingly orchestrated fraud and that she can provide documents proving it. Why would she betray her husband? Because he was setting her up as fall guy? Assets transferred into her name for liability protection. Corporate documents showing her as officer responsible for regulatory compliance. If criminal case went wrong for Victor, he planned to claim Isabella was responsible for fraud while he was deceived husband who trusted wrong person. She discovered paperwork making her scapegoat and decided to burn his life down before he could burn hers. Will she testify? If granted immunity from prosecution and protection from civil liability. I'm coordinating with federal prosecutors now. This could be death blow to Victor's defense wife testifying about his private admissions of guilt. Rob felt pieces falling into place, pattern emerging from chaos. Victor's empire was crumbling from within, destroyed by same ruthless calculation that had built it. He'd made enemies of everyone, former employees, family members, even his wife, and now they were all aligned against him. The meeting with Isabella Ashford happened in federal prosecutor's office 1 week later. Isabella was 42 but looked younger despite stress lines that hadn't been there in society photos from her modeling days. She wore jeans and sweater instead of designer clothes Rob had seen at Plaza Gala. Transformation from trophy wife to ordinary person who'd been trapped in extraordinary circumstances. Dr. Morrison, Isabella shook his hand with grip that suggested strength beneath cultivated fragility. Victor speaks about you often. Obsessively, actually. You represent every failure he refuses to acknowledge about himself. He destroyed my career. I know. He bragged about it, treated it like proof of his superiority that he could eliminate threat before it became dangerous. But he was wrong. You became more dangerous by surviving than you would have been by succeeding on his terms. Isabella spent next 3 hours describing her marriage to Victor, evidence she'd accumulated, reasons she was willing to testify. She showed prosecutors USB drive containing encrypted files Victor had kept as insurance policy documentation of every fraud, every bribe, every illegal action. Victor had maintained these records, believing they protected him by creating mutual assured destruction with anyone who might turn against him. Instead, they became evidence for his conviction. Federal Prosecutor Park reviewed files with visible excitement that professional demeanor couldn't completely conceal. Mrs. Ashford, this is extraordinary. Video recordings of Victor discussing fraud, audio files of conversations with co-conspirators, financial records showing money laundering. This isn't evidence that builds case, this is case itself completely documented. Use it however necessary to convict him. Isabella's voice was cold. Victor thought he could use me and discard me when convenient. He was wrong. I want him in prison for the rest of his life. As Rob left prosecutor's office that evening, walking out into November cold that felt appropriate to moment's gravity, he understood that war was essentially won. Victor might fight, might deploy expensive lawyers and PR firms, but evidence was overwhelming. Justice would be served, however slowly, through mechanisms designed to be thorough rather than fast. The question that remained wasn't whether Victor would be convicted. It was whether conviction would bring peace Rob had been seeking for 23 years, or whether peace required something more that legal system couldn't provide. He walked through Boston streets toward hotel, where he'd stay before returning to New York, thinking about everything that had brought him to this moment, about choices made and opportunities lost, about roads taken and roads abandoned, about whether person he'd become was who he'd wanted to be or merely who circumstances had forced him to be. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Bradley says settlement negotiations starting, Thornhill offering $2 billion to resolve civil claims. Wants your approval before proceeding. Are you ready to accept victory? Rob stared at message for a long time before responding. Victory. The word felt strange, hollow. Not wrong exactly, but insufficient to capture complexity of what they'd achieved and what it had cost. Finally, he texted back, victory is in settlement. Victory is Victor in prison and drug removed from market. Everything else is just money. Don't settle until both conditions met absolutely. Sarah's response came immediately. Bradley agrees. We fight until end. Rob pocketed phone and continued walking, breath visible in cold air, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. The end was approaching. After 23 years, after countless setbacks and humiliations after survival that had sometimes felt worse than surrender would have been, the end was finally approaching, and Rob intended to be standing when it arrived. Victor Ashford's trial began on a Monday morning in late March when winter was releasing its grip on Washington, D.C., but hadn't yet surrendered completely to spring. Federal courthouse loomed against gray sky, neoclassical architecture, promising justice through marble columns and bronze doors that required 2 men to open. Rob arrived early, with Sarah both dressed in conservative suits that spoke of respect for proceedings without attempting to compete with Victor's expensive legal team. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Media-filled designated press section reporters Rob recognized from months of coverage, sitting shoulder to shoulder with local journalists, hoping for career-making story. Victims and their families occupied rows behind prosecution table. Sarah Mitchell in her wheelchair. Caleb Henderson still showing slight tremor from seizures that medication couldn't completely control elderly patients, whose trembling came from Oxy Relief Pro rather than age. Behind defense tables sat Victor's remaining supporters, corporate executives, pharmaceutical industry lobbyists, conservative pundits, who'd framed prosecution as assault on free enterprise. Victor entered through side door with his legal team 6 attorneys, led by Marcus Webb, legendary defense lawyer, who'd successfully defended CEOs in Enron scandal and multiple pharmaceutical fraud cases. Victor wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $8,000, perfectly tailored to project authority and respectability. His hair had grayed further during months since arrest, but somehow it made him look distinguished rather than diminished. Even facing potential life sentence, Victor maintained aristocratic